Welcome to this week's episode of Let's Talk Dog Business, where we are talking to Kim Brophey, all things legs, in a way that you may not think.
Oh, Kim, thank you ever so much for joining us today on this podcast. I'm really excited to delve into, I don't even know where the conversation is going to go, but I'm super excited to have you here and to get talking with you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
No, it's going to be amazing.
We've been really looking forward to this.
I have been looking forward to this. It's going to be good. So for everybody listening who may not know who you are, please tell everybody a little bit about yourself and the journey to how you've got here.
Yes, and I will avoid a long rabbit hole because I like most stories, it's long and complicated. But long story short, I was a kid that was always really obsessed with dogs. Grew up in a major city in the US when dogs were still loose. So had a interesting childhood experience where dogs were still free roaming in the United States at the time, which is of course no longer the case. And then decided that I wanted a career working with animals. And at the same time, thought I didn't want to be a dog trainer, which is kind of one of the ironic twists in my story because of some experiences I had when I was younger in the dog training classes that I attended. And I did not like the model that I experienced. So I went to college and was able to get a degree in the applied relationship between human and animal behavior with the thought that I would be working just specifically with service and therapy dogs. And at the time, the Delta Society was kind of leading the positive reinforcement movement and things like that. And that was very appealing to me. So that was what I thought I would do, was just train service and therapy dogs. And then the field of behavior consulting was kind of being born the year that I graduated, with the IABC becoming more prevalent and people appreciating that there was kind of a different role in addition to being a dog trainer for solving complex behavior problems. And then established my behavior center and did behavior consulting for the last 25 years, and then increasingly got into teaching, presenting, and now have an online education center that is based on that applied ethology model and trying to reintroduce it to the industry.
Yeah, I feel like it's been quite a revolutionary, I don't even know what the right word is, but when that L.E.G.S course came out, I feel like it was something like a really important moment in the industry to go, this is a bit different. This is something that hasn't really been looked at before, or in such a public way anyway, and then to make it so publicly available.
Yeah, I felt that was a really pivotal time.
Pivotal,
in
that
the
was the word I was
UK,
looking for. Definitely.
People were like talking, it was such a buzz about you when that came out, and a lot of people were going, have you done that course? You need to do it.
Yeah, no, it's been, I can't think of another word apart from like revolutionary, and the fact that people are still really excited, and I feel like it's still in its infancy in terms of the take up on it. But how did you kind of go from that being a trainer, behaviorist, running a business, to then making this leap into, I suppose, the online space, and then the journey into the gravitas of what that course has now ended up being?
Yeah, kind of accidentally is the answer. I mean, it's like I've always loved teaching, and I've done a lot of, teaching at local colleges and universities and vet tech programs and things like that, presented at conferences. And I've always just really loved it because it gives me an opportunity to kind of consolidate research that I'm working from to be able to share it with other people. And I see that as the role, right? Is more like connect the dots, package it, make it relatable and understandable, applicable for others. And I love that collaborative exchange. And I had a client actually who I trained a service dog because the model I did service dog training was client training their dog with my guidance and help. And she was really interested in getting into the field and asked me, so what if you just taught me everything you know? And I was like, how much time do you have? So she basically, long story short, took money that she had for college and asked her parents if she could apply it to, spending 2 years studying with me, and asked me to develop a comprehensive curriculum, front to back, bookends, of basically what's in the Meet Your Dog book, but expanded. So we had, required reading and viewing, and then discussions and projects and papers and all this stuff. And so I created the L.E.G.S course for one young woman, thinking that would be the end of it. And then another colleague and friend asked me, so can I come and visit you and you teach me everything that you know that fills in the blanks with all the other things that I've already learned as a behavior consultant and trainer, like kind of beyond the operant box? And I was like, sure. So you can come spend a week with me and I'll fit that whole course into that week. And so after that, Mike Shikashio said, Kim, nobody's teaching applied ethology in the industry right now, and somebody really needs to. We had both presented at a conference in Mexico together. And he said, you should do it. And I was like, well, I don't really want to do an online course. And he's like, I'll help you. And he did. And he was absolutely wonderful in inviting me and then helping me get started with the platform. And I just jumped. It was just a leap of faith because I had to have our other lead consultant take over my client load in order to be able to do it. And she was able to do that. And I guess the rest is history. We've been holding on for dear life ever since, because it was surprising how well received it was after years of the industry not honestly being very receptive.
Yeah. Wow. I mean,
that's a great story.
That's a brilliant story. But yeah, there's so many little facets and nuggets I kind of want to delve into off the back of that. So I suppose that we talk a lot on this podcast about how trainers specifically have fear about doing anything really, and how, I don't know, it's possibly going off too much on a tangent, but that imposter syndrome creeps in on everything, and having that faith and that belief to actually follow through on something. But then also on another weird tangent, you had your training business as well. So to be able to even go all in on looking at the legs and the collaborative side of everything, leaving your business open to growing in a different way without you being in it, I imagine is also quite a scary thing. Because we've certainly done it, and we're going through the growth of our training business as well as growing this one. So we can totally relate to that. Oh, who's coming in? You're now in a completely different role again, aren't you? Because then you're having to be a proper business owner now. You've got to manage people and you've got to set expectations. And how did all of that feel to you? And what were your key learnings on going through that journey?
Well, that I needed a clone, right? And unfortunately that didn't happen. And so, per kind of a recent Facebook post that I just put out, what I did was I just burnt the candle at both ends for 3 years trying to run both, because I was surprised that the course did so well, as I said. And so it was hard stepping away from the business, and it had consequences. It ultimately was a problem that I wasn't able to be in two places at once. And I didn't really know that would be kind of the long game, right? I kind of had this idea, like, I'm going to create this course and just like give myself a deadline, and I'm going to have to buckle down and put it together. And then next year it'll be like, it's just out there, set it and forget it. And then I can go back to behavior consulting. And that did not happen because of the worldwide community that just like organically grew out of this conversation, as you said, the imposter syndrome, holy cow, is that real? I mean, for everyone in this business, like there's no one in the business that doesn't experience it, and yet there's so many actors in social media in our industry that will kind of project that they don't experience imposter syndrome and be happy to tell everyone else what they're doing wrong. And so being the target of online bullying was something that I didn't expect. And of course, anybody that's in the arena ends up being the target at some point of online bullying. People sometimes, I think, are looking to misunderstand. And in those cases, it's a hard learned lesson that there's no point in trying to explain, because when someone is dead set on not understanding, that just creates an argument in a public sphere. And so that was always tough to learn, in that first year, especially, and very humbling. And so what I've tried to do is just kind of maintain a tone and a boundary and a commitment to what we're trying to do, and not engage with those dynamics and try to rise above them. And it's actually really worked in a strange way. I'm very optimistic and idealistic person. And I know that, I own that. And often, I get disappointed by life and I'm like, oh, people disappointed me again. That's a shame. And yet I go right back to being obscenely optimistic again. But in this case, it's really worked out, and it's invited people to bring them their best selves to the conversation. So that's been inspiring and also very surprising, just to see that it's been possible to have this level of professional collaboration on an international scale. It's just amazing. And I think as far as letting go of my behavior center, I think it was just time. I think for me, I had to choose, and one thing I could pass off and one thing I couldn't. One thing I felt like I kind of had a responsibility to see through in the FDM Education Center. And with the behavior center, I could pass that off to my team, buyers that are dear friends, and actually also family dog mediators that are completely supportive of the model. So I get to see it become its own evolution of where it needs to go. And I just couldn't support both, and I didn't want to let it down anymore.
Yeah.
It's looking back at that time where you were splitting yourself between the two businesses for 3 years. That's a long time to do that for as well.
I need a medal just for that.
Yeah. On reflection, what would you have done differently?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I give myself credit for doing my best, right? And so I can't look back and say I have regrets, because I know I did my best. But I think that I would have liked to have had a better plan, but I'm not sure that would have been possible because I didn't know where it was going. It would have been nice to be able to give my team more of a heads up that I was at the end of my rope. And I think sometimes I'm not good at asking for help. So if there's one thing that I think I consistently fail at, it's saying uncle, right? And so it's like, I got it. I'm okay. I got it. I can do it. I can juggle it, right? And I felt too like my team needed that from me, right? They needed that positive, it's okay, team. We've got it. We'll do this. And so I think maybe it was a bit of a curveball when, after the grief of losing 3 dogs last year, I found the end of that rope squarely and was like, uncle, can't do it anymore. Everything became crystal clear. I have nothing left, and I'm going to have to choose to take care of myself in order to keep moving forward to help anybody. But I know that was also disappointing to them, because our team becomes our family, and I felt so responsible for them and their livelihood. So I've had to trust passing that to someone else.
Yeah. How many did you have has your team grown over that 3-year period?
No, the behavior center team stayed pretty small. It's always been a team of just a couple of behavior consultants, and then general full-time manager, a full-time assistant manager, and then some retail associates and stuff, because we had a storefront in downtown Asheville as well. So in general, it's been a team of 5 or 7 at any given time.
It's really hard, that though, isn't it? Letting go of any of it. It's partly letting it go, but it's also I'm the head of all of this and I should be able to handle everything on my own. And I know I've definitely been in that position where I'm like, no, I've got it. I'm on top of everything. And you really piece by piece breaking apart inside, but you can't let that show to everybody. Yeah. And I think that is a common thing in this industry.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think so too.
I think it's common in a lot of industries when you're an entrepreneur. However, in dog world, I feel like it's actually doubled, because you are trying to be everything for the dog and be everything for the person and be everything for the business. Mm-hmm. You've almost got to split yourself in more ways than if you were a standard air quote entrepreneur, if there is, where it's more of a businessy model, because you've got all of these different moving parts and behaviors and emotions and everything to consider, all wrapped up in one. And then not even taking on the massive weight, I suppose, of the pressure that I think this industry is really poor at, and we've talked about it before. We put pressure on each other in, you can't even have open conversations, or it doesn't feel like, certainly at the moment, there is a lot of negativity around social media posts, people not being very nice and kind to one another. And this industry feels like it's a little bit on breaking point in terms of people are either leaving or burning out or everything because of having to wear all these hats.
Yeah. In fact, we're currently going through the process of expanding our dog training business and taking some trainers on board. And a comment this week from a lady who's currently shadowing us and learning all about everything has gone, wow, you have so much to think about and consider, not only with the logistics of fitting everything in, but when you're with the client and adapting to each client and the dogs and the skills that, that's one side, isn't it? The mechanical skills and just your, confidence as a dog trainer. And then you've got the social side. Then you're taking on all of their problems. And we had a conversation with Andrew Hale about his safe space and all of that, because we feel like that's missing as well. Like everybody's taking on these burdens of other people's dogs and their problems, and it can really affect their lives. And that can lead then to that burnout and frustration and lack of, the right clients coming on board, as they say. That's how it's kind of fed back to us. So it is all connected together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really found that, I thought I was becoming like a complete introvert in my late 20s, 30s, 40s. I was like really social when I was younger and loved going out with friends and stuff like that. And in the last like 15 years or so, I do have 2 kids. And of course, that's a social drain on like your internal resources on a regular basis and all of the things that they have going on. But I thought like, okay, well, I'm just becoming like really hermitous. I don't want to socialize anymore, because I found I didn't want to hang out with people. I just wanted to be home when I wasn't working and seeing clients and running the business. And what's so interesting, just in the last literally like 6 weeks or so after this transition and selling the company, is that my social battery is back with a fervor. And I think I had no idea how much my interactions with clients and the staff and just the set of expectations that was, obviously put upon me as a business owner. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But you're right. It is so draining, because if you really show up for people, if you really show up for your team, if you really show up for your clients and their dogs and their families, and you're thinking about them and like, doing justice by them and trying to adapt to all those various needs, it's a huge drain on our emotional and mental resources. And so that's been kind of surprising. And it's made me realize that I was probably too stubborn to admit that I was getting burnt out. I was like, it's fine, just that whole thing. And what's been fascinating about the family dog mediation community and the whole group of L.E.G.S students is that I'm finding it's feeding my social battery, like, because it's this collaborative sharing in this way, as you're talking about, say, with Andrew Hale's group and these safe spaces, which are so rare online and in this industry, where you're not feeling alone and drained and, tapped out. You're feeling like, I am able to share ideas, experiences, feelings that I'm having, get validation and reinforcement for what I'm going through, and not judgment. And I think the one simple rule that we've had in our group of check your ego at the door has been mind-blowingly transformative for what could happen in there, because we will hold people to it. There's no, you can't make other people right or wrong. Like, it's not allowed. And so you are allowed to ask any questions, inquire, be curious about things you don't understand, share your own observations and experiences about things, but you cannot judge other people publicly in that group and create that kind of tribalism that frankly is, I feel, destroying our industry right now, with the poor public and the dogs being the kind of fallout, right? Like they're just completely confused and have no idea which end is up in terms of what resources they should be seeking and what the standards of practice should be, what kind of services they could expect, because our industry is in shambles. And I'm really hoping that we'll be able to have kind of a revolution like in this field and be able to kind of find the middle way moving forward, instead of continuing to just be so cruel to each other.
Yeah, it's a powerful word, that, isn't it? That it's shambles of what it is. And I think it describes it beautifully. And it's certainly our mission to actually be part of this change, where hopefully we can uplift it and get everybody working more collaboratively and stop the burnout. And it's a it's a big old mission when you start thinking about it. But we are so passionate about getting people to think about all of these different things. And we genuinely believe that it is possible to deliver awesome service, to have exceptional relationships with your clients, to make sure that that social battery is charged in a good way, that you do get to have this balance. But we are also a massive believer that you can't do that unless you actually start looking at your business like a business as well. You have to have all of this dog knowledge. Yes, super important. You have to have the skills. You have to do all of that stuff. But that on its own, in our personal opinion anyway, it is what's somewhat leading this industry into that shambles area, because that's where the 100% focus is on, and we're not creating a profession which is professional.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the idea is that like the bar is, and the model is burnout, bleed yourself dry. It's a self destroying martyrdom kind of profession, right? I mean, and I'm not saying that that's something intentionally designed, but it's amazing how common that kind of expectation is for ourselves, and how we tend to, put all of those things together for our practice. I, at one point, was seeing like about 40 private clients a week and just pushing myself. We would do 8-hour days with no breaks between clients at the behavior center. And I was just like, yeah, you got to do it. You got to do it. These people need help, and didn't have good boundaries for myself, and probably didn't model the best boundaries for my fellow consultants at the dog door in that way, because I was like, well, I can do it, so you can do it. And we can just, get all this stuff done here. But I think it really does create a lack of professionalism, and ultimately a cost to the people and the dogs we're serving, because we're not really thinking about that human element and that professional element, and like, what are the things that we need, like our human legs, to use the L.E.G.S model. We talk about this a lot in our, community, is that like our own formula of our learning, our environment, our genetics, and ourself, those factors for each of us is informing our own choices and what we're doing. And we can be as deficient as a dog might be in one or more of those categories in a way that really needs attention, or our clients might be, right? And just kind of ignoring that human side beyond the kind of superficial, we're training the human how to do the things, right? We're all good at knowing, yes, we're training people, not training dogs, or both, right? We're training people too. We know that. But really, we're interacting with the complexity of their being in this relationship that they're having with this other being, as our own complex being, with our own stuff going on under the hood and behind the scenes, And I think being more on the being open about that and talking with each other, I think is really critical. And so in our actually community right now, we're just starting an additional kind of service support group within our licensure, where people can be working with one of our members, two of our members actually, but one of them is a mental health professional who's just going to be kind of offering some tools and frameworks and support for the members of the community, so that they can be more consciously aware of these things and how it's affecting their work, whether that's as a trainer, working in a shelter, a veterinary hospital, groomer, breeder, whatever that might be. It's important.
I think it's could be such a catalyst for change if everybody started looking at how important that mental health and our personal development and looking after ourselves makes such a difference to our outlook. And like something you said there about, we arguably aren't serving the clients and the dogs in the right way. And we are massive on the customer journey and the whole experience from the customer perspective, which I think as dog trainers, we don't often do. We're so in it and we're so absorbed in our businesses and the way we do things, and we can see the entire journey. But is it logical, and is it simple, and is it clear, and is it going to get the results that people want? Is that your experience of the generalization of dog training in the US?
Yes, I would say so. I think it's the same thing. Andrew Hale talks about the difference between task and care, right? Like, we're so focused on task with ourselves too, not just with the dogs we're working with. We're like, I think we have this idea as dog trainers, everything's like performance metrics instead of like quality of life metrics. And this is a huge underlying theme in the L.E.G.S community. It's like, I remember so much of my career feeling like I had to impress other trainers and I had to impress my clients. And it's about getting dogs to do fancy stuff. And now that we have social media, it's even more pressure, right? You have to have great videos of your dogs and your clients' dogs doing all this really fancy stuff and be like, wow, look what I got them to do. But is that task necessarily supporting an improvement in that dog's welfare? Sometimes, not always. It just looks really cool to have a before and after. And training is something that we as an industry have gotten so good at. We've really cracked the code of how to change behavior. So if you get educated in all of that, then you can do amazing stuff. And everyone's really busy patting themselves on the back and patting other people on the back for all of that task. But underneath that, we could be totally neglecting care. And we could be totally neglecting a fundamental welfare for that dog and then for ourselves or for our clients. So we've mastered all these skills. We're seeing all this superficial change, but that animal's needs or that person's needs might still be really suffering underneath it. So I would love to see, for both of our species, a real shift in values and paradigm where we are less concerned with that performance of being dog trainers and more concerned with, I solved the problem for the dog, for the person, for myself, and everyone feels better, even if nothing fancy happened at all and it was completely boring looking, right? Because it doesn't make for great TV, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we're all up for, we run training programs where we work with clients on a longer term basis to build those relationships and to really understand their needs and to, again, get the outcomes that they are wanting from working with us. And yeah, a lot of the time people are scared to not do a performance fancy teach the dog session. Whereas we find the most valuable sessions for us are the let's sit down with a cup of tea. Let's find out what you're struggling with. What can we change? What can we do to make this happen? And
very conscious, you sounded incredibly British there. Let's sit down with a cup of tea.
No. Or coffee, or whatever. Or a beer, whatever. I have been offered beers on dog training sessions before, which I politely declined, even though I'd probably want one. But yeah, it's that kind of, they're so good for people. And, you know, they're the sessions where people go, thank you so much for just letting me just get all of this out and listen to me and just giving me that space to talk.
I think it's having the confidence in the value that we're offering as professionals in going, it's not about that performance element, like you say. There's elements of it, like performing in terms of getting a loose lead is an element of performing. However, it's realistically, how is that going to bed into that client's lifestyle? How realistic is it for them to transfer it and proof it across all of these different environments? What is the real pain that's behind it? Do they just think they need to have a dog that walks nicely on lead? Does it actually bother them? But if we're not investing our time in thinking about the human half of that relationship, our brains can immediately go, yeah, I'm like awesome at dog training. Of course I can. And I can fix it, air quote, I can show them that dog can loose lead walk in one session and then ta-da, we're done. So people are actually mortified when we've been telling people that if people have signed up with us for an example like loose lead walking, we enroll them immediately on a 6-month program and inevitably they end up staying with us for about 12 to 18 months because guess what? We're not just working on loose lead.
Right.
But
right.
It's you've got to have that confidence in yourself, haven't you, that you're giving value. Like the amount of, and this is where I really struggle when I look at this industry. We invest so much time, money and energy into our CPD, our consistent and constant learning of dog knowledge, yet we're pricing those services at a pittance where it's not sustainable to continue in this industry and live, and people are then doing double jobs. And somehow it's a bad thing if you charge enough to pay your bills.
Right. Yeah, completely. Yeah. And I think you're so right that it's always just like the tip of the iceberg, whatever's brought to us, and the client kind of like list when they're calling of all the things I want to change or address or what have you is always just kind of their experience of the dog's behavior. It's not the whole of the dog's behavior, and definitely not the whole of the dog's welfare or needs. And so I think that moving into a model where we really are, I'm sorry, I keep getting photobombed by my cat here. He's the one I'm like over here being like, he's trying to step on the computer, which will probably turn off the podcast. So anyway, it's always the hands out here. I'm like, what are you doing? But you know, I had that experience constantly too. And it's actually really beautiful when you have confidence in that process, because you're really changing people's lives when you say, I know you think it's about just pulling on leash. Instead of saying, okay, my job's come in, make the dog quit pulling on leash. Here you go. Bye. That'll be this much money. Right. But that relationship model you're saying, instead of that transactional model where you're saying like, I'm invested in you as my client, as a family, you and your dog together as a unit. It's why I love the family dog mediation model. It's like everybody matters here. And my job is to be a detective of details and figure out where the behavior is actually coming from at its root, beyond the kind of like, you know, what is the, you know, traditional kind of ABC model of the proximate antecedent and then behavior and consequence. Like, what's setting up that antecedent? Like, how far back does that antecedent iceberg really go that can help us appreciate like where it's really sourcing from? Otherwise, we're going to end up playing that game of whack-a-mole, right? So when we can chase those breadcrumbs down to their sources, and we can be like, oh, so if you change this, or you provide this, and you shift this, or you no longer pushing this or expecting this or what have you, the people often have kind of a life-changing experience through that relationship with their dog. And that is like, that's it. I mean, that right there was like what filled my cup every day and pushed me to get out of bed and make myself bleed myself dry. It was just that experience was so highly reinforcing for me. And I think most of us want that. It's not that most of us are in this industry just to get dogs to do cool stuff so we feel cool. I think most of us really care about dogs and people, but we find that it's hard to do that if we don't have good boundaries for ourselves, you know? And frankly, the way we're treating each other is making it harder for everybody. You know, the cruelty on top of that existing imposter syndrome that so many people are treating each other with, it's appalling. And I also know it's not intentional. Like for myself, I use ethology a lot to understand human behavior in a way that really helps me feel much better. And I can put it in a framework. We can share that in our community, talk about human psychology research and discussions related to kind of the source of tribalism and the need to belong and like the fear of rejection and kind of how that comes into play for us as we're working with dogs. Because it creates less judgment for me of the people who are judging, right? I don't want to just create part of the problem by judging the people who are judging. I want to be able to transcend that too and say, I get that the place you're coming from is really true and authentic for you because of your legs. And so I can just try my best to hold my truth in that and just move forward in a way that isn't adding to the conflict.
Yeah.
That's such a good aspect, isn't it? That you look at the person and they've been made to think that certain way because of their experiences and genetic makeup and all of that stuff. It relates so well together, doesn't it?
I everything to me just like interlinks. And since I've become a parent, so I've got a 2 and 4-year-old. So we're still in like lovely toddler years.
Yeah.
They are definitely, it's the dog years I call, because there's similarities.
They're puppies, yes.
They are. You're proper puppies. But ever since becoming that parent and then using the dog knowledge and experience that I've got and literally applying that model to my parenting style, and the amount of judgment I get for how I parent the boys, they're like, oh my gosh, like you're giving a 2-year-old choice? I'm like, yeah. It's like, why? But it's so interesting. And I just see the similarities across owning a dog to, I was going to say owning a child, to having a child or being responsible for a child. They're so similar in the expectations of what that small person, that small creature can actually do and where that knowledge comes from and how their experiences will lend to how they react to all of that. And again, like having that ability to hold your own space to go, look, I know that I am educated enough and I have experienced this and I see the results. So I have full confidence in my knowledge and my ability to deliver a program that will help you get to a better solution with your dog. And that will be a journey because, hey, it's not just about fixing that loose lead. Mm-hmm. It is about everything else. And then that's where that business element comes in and going, well, if I market it like that, nobody's going to buy it because they're thinking, I just want that thing fixed. So then we have to get clever in terms of really putting ourselves in the mindset of that client, but then taking them on that journey. And I genuinely love the way that we deliver our programs because the relationships we get off the back of it, I genuinely feel that we are making more of an impact, one human being at a time, over a period of time, that they are then going to start treating their other humans in their lifestyle differently because they're aware of psychology a lot more because you're naturally bringing that in. They are aware of dogs more. So if they get another dog or if a family member gets another dog, they will interact with them differently. And hopefully it's a movement for future years, not the immediate wins for right now.
Yeah, and it's learning on a deeper level because we are thinking en masse a lot of the time as dog trainers and we go, we need to get this message out to all of these people really quickly so that we can make a shift. But actually, like Joe just said, doing it one person at a time might be a bit slower, but look at the depth that you can go into. And look at the changes, the internal changes you can make that they can then spread to other people. So it's not just us preaching to people, it's you're intrinsically feeling different about it and you can spread that message.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting that you say that because I remember early on in my career, so like it's embarrassing, but when I got my degree, one of the most popular books, one of the only books, in addition to Sarah Whitehead's and a few others that I had at the time, but like popular dog training, of course, was like Monks of New Skeet. So here I am like reading this book while I'm in college and trying out basically everything that I'm reading, right? On my poor guinea pig Australian Shepherd that was just the brunt of all my youthful experimentation on what on earth all this stuff is. And I remember the feeling that I had inside when, say, I alpha rolled her. Here I am, 19 years old, 20 years old, like reading this book and being like, oh, you were barking at something. I didn't want you to. And I alpha rolled her. And first of all, I just felt like a jerk. But second of all, what I found was in that period of time where I was like, well, I'm trying this and I have to try to like be this person or whatever. I found that treating her that way was affecting how I was treating other people. And like, it made me have this impatient, control-oriented, like, don't do that, whatever. And it was like infectious, right? In my being. And as a person who like, that wasn't even part of my natural inclination as just a human. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, whatever we do with our dogs, whatever we teach people to do with our dogs, we're practicing that behavior and it's going to come out towards our friends, our kids, other people, dogs, whatever. Like, and so I think you're so right. It's like maybe a little kumbaya, but I think we are actually changing the world, improving the world, one person, one family, one dog at a time, by holding true to what we think is the most deeply important in that process of mediating that relationship and whatever conflicts are there.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful, really, isn't it? When you actually stop and think about the impact that we're having. And to me, again, it comes back to we are desperate for people to see the value in what they are doing. All you people that are listening now that are working with dogs, you are part of this movement. You are creating this change. You are something special because not everybody can do this job. And if you do not start seeing yourself as valuable, and I hate the word charging, but having a fee that projects that value, this industry is going to be, I daren't even think where it could be in a few years if we continue on the trajectory that we currently are with these really ad hoc sessions and just poor ability to be able to future-proof anybody's mental health, anybody's just ability to continue doing what we all love. Like where will it be? All of these CPD providers, what are they going to do when there's no dog trainers left to be able to deliver?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it needs to be like about the quality of services, as you're saying, that feels authentic and complete, where we're charging accordingly for that a service confidently. Instead of what I often see happening is, the clients are complaining potentially about the money. People will lower their costs, increase the numbers, reduce the quality of services just to make ends meet. And I don't think that that's an ultimate service to the professional, the family, the dog, any of it, right? So kind of stepping back and saying, like, how can I give more to each family, starting with the moment that they reach out and are looking for help, right? So like the way that my company was run historically is very unusual in the industry. And I understand it's not that this is the way to do it, but I'll explain why we did it this way. There's lots of different models you could follow, but we had a designated person answering the phone Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, answering questions, calling people back within 24 hours, spending upwards of 45 minutes potentially on the phone with each of those clients in that moment when they're reaching out for help, to give them hope, to at least give them something to get them to their appointment, not necessarily behavior advice, but just some kind of like practical management stuff that we would teach our team, so that like if it was a safety issue with a child in the house, or the person is getting bitten by their own dog, they feel like someone is there on the other end of the phone to help them in that first moment. And for us, we felt like that was a big justification component for why we charged what we did, is because we had complete and total customer service. And once you were a client of our company, we were always there to help you navigate the struggles as you move forward. That said, what I see is so many professionals wanting to be that for their clients, but they don't have an assistant. So they literally have given their cell phone number to every single one of their clients, and they answer those calls and those emails morning, noon, and night and weekend, without that personal boundary in order to say, now it's time for me to go be with my family, myself, recharge my battery, etc. And that just leads to further burnout too, because we're trying to do all the things and wear all the hats instead of asking for help.
Yeah. And I think this is where it comes back to your messaging and what it is that you're trying to, you're trying to attract in the first place, because then you'll get a manageable amount of inquiries from the right people. And then you can probably start to manage it on your own if there is only one of you. So, again, if you look at your business why and purpose and all of those things, and that will help you then put these processes in place that prevent the burnout in that kind of perspective.
Yeah, they
almost, it's all intertwined, isn't it?
Yeah, they create the boundaries because you're systemizing everything. So for anybody to get in touch with us, it's to book a call, and there's a link on the website which has access to our diary, and we set the diary hours as whatever they are, and people can book a call in with us. And if it's more urgent, we'll go, right, message us. But again, in reality, and having done this for collectively like 25 years now, realistically, there is nothing that urgent that can't wait for a few hours, like overnight or the next day, or something where everybody's a little bit more. Because realistically, again, like even if it is the worst case scenario, and I think that these are rare, but you've got a dog that's like biting and it's the middle of the night, what are you going to do in the middle of the night?
Right.
Like get out of bed and go, I couldn't do that. I've got the kids. No. And then I'm going to get myself into such a state that I can't go and help. But then how often does that happen? And how much do I need to do that? And those boundaries of going, actually, no, these are the hours that I can work. These are the things that we're doing. Funnily enough, we've been doing loads of diary work over the last few weeks and going, right, this day we're going to allow this time for the training business. We're going to allow this time for the business coaching business. We've got podcast days in the studios booked in for the next year. We've got my uni days booked in for next year because God help me, I've got another year left of that. We've got all this stuff, but we have to plan it and then go, right, here are the boundaries. This is where I'm going to spend time with the kids. This is when we're going to do this. This is when we're going to do that. And everything slots in and around it. But it's so clear because we've done that pre-work of, we know exactly what we want the business to achieve. We know exactly how we're going to achieve it. We believe wholeheartedly in the value that we are giving our clients, and everything just feels easy because the work has been done to get to that point. And I'm going to take this line of thought now down to what what's your opinion then? So if someone's coming into the industry now and wanting to be a dog trainer, or we've got like fledgling dog trainers, maybe they've only been in it for about 12 months and they're very much immersed in, I need to do that course and that course and that course. To me, I find it really, like if somebody asks me the question now with one of those two scenarios, I genuinely don't know how to answer it anymore and going, I don't know the best way for you to start, because which course do you do? Do you even do a course? Do you go straight into thinking about business? Because it's all important. So what do you think about it all? Because I'm a bit stuck.
I think that it's such an important question, because what we don't have is like the clear career path. Our industry is totally lacking a traditional career path. And I think in part it's because it's been built around a model that I think is fragile of the pet concept. And I think as we're hopefully shifting the paradigm towards realizing we're sharing our lives with this sentient being, right, that happens to be captive and living in our homes. And that creates a lot of complexity, right? Just kind of starting with the reality check for me, all right, that's my own personal bias, I think then helps inform what's next for professionals. Because I think if a professional kind of comes at it with the model that they have been taught of dogs equal pets, that's what they are. So there's this job where you can train them to be good pets, because all dogs have to be trained to be good pets. Instead of thinking dogs are a sentient being like any other being on the planet that for thousands of years and still doesn't need humans to come in and teach them how to survive and live. We're not out there micromanaging every other species on the planet so that they can function. And yet we actually have come to believe that that is the lot for dogs, that they're just blind fools and idiots. And if we don't train them, that they will be unable to function, instead of realizing that a lot of the behavior that we're seeing is a product of the captive conditions that characterize the last few decades. And so they're struggling to conform to these new set of restrictions and expectations and things like that. But so if we shift the lens first, I think it can help inform what is the most appealing path or niche for us within this turning tide that we are right in the middle of, because it's a weird time to be joining the industry. It's really confusing. And so of course I'm biased, but one of the things I love about the L.E.G.S curriculum is it's a good plug-in for whatever someone's already doing or is gonna do, because what it does is it gives you the reality check of, from an ethological perspective, from the natural sciences perspective, before you start changing behavior, understand where it's coming from on a universal scale for all organisms, for all of life, what it's for, right? On that ultimate evolutionary kind of timeline, like what are those levels of functions for all of the behaviors you're seeing? How does a natural selection, artificial selection work to create all the behavior we're seeing now? So before we set about trying to kind of manipulate it or squish those square pegs in round holes or whatever it is, or just even manage it in daycare or a veterinary environment or whatever, I think understanding that first, then will direct whatever feels right for us next. Because a lot of the students in the L.E.G.S community have been in this industry for decades. And they're finding that the course is actually giving them permission to change directions professionally in ways that they've kind of been wanting to and feeling at their core for a while, but they break the mold of what's currently out there in the field. So there's been that kind of hesitation, but then they get all that scientific validation and substantiation for what they've been observing and experiencing that then frees them to say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to actually create a canine behavior enrichment center. That's what I really want to do. I want to do that more than I want to be a trainer at this point. I want to be able to provide for those dogs' needs to prevent and resolve behavior problems first, before we say to the dog, hey, I need you to change the expression of your behavior based on the expectations of myself and this other human. We can actually provide those resources in our community and like totally revolutionize the industry by coming up with new business models. So, I mean, again, all that said, like, I think there's just so many paths. I think part of the problem is people figuring out which is the right one for me. And there's tons of great courses out there. about how to work with dogs in a variety of capacities with different specializations, whether that be aggression, separation anxiety, resource guarding, whatever. And I know so many colleagues that are putting out amazing material. So I think kind of listening to yourself and finding what really speaks to you about this moment in history and our relationship with dogs is probably the first order of things.
Yeah, I like it. It honestly, it makes so much sense. And I think you're right. I think certainly somebody coming into the industry now, it is so confusing. I don't know what it's like actually over in the States, but certainly here you've got some key accrediting bodies, which a lot of people feel they need to be part of. However, the way that it's kind of executed, it almost doesn't mean anything because the public don't understand it anyway. So it's this weird time again where you're fighting to go, I need to get this stuff. I need that badge. I need that validation from that organization that I can do this. But then you do all that work and then it's almost like it feels like it means nothing because it actually means nothing to anyone. I've recently just done, as part of like my mini dissertation bit, a survey on the public's perception on accrediting and accreditations and qualifications within the industry. And shock horror, the feedback came as like, I don't really know anything. I've kind of heard of the odd one, but it means nothing to me. It's not going to stop me. It's not going to make me pick that trainer over that trainer. It's not going to do anything. Yet weirdly, I love your nodding head here. But weirdly, like we're all fighting to get this bloody badge. And I'm like, for what purpose? Surely we should be investing our time in delivering better services and looking at that model of creating long-lasting change rather than, I don't know, like it feels like it's clambering to go and get this badge for me, what feels like.
Well, my opinion on it is that we're doing it for our peers, like we're doing it for their validation. And I was about to then ask you, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. You took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say, we get our credentials for each other.
Yeah.
It's like how, so they say women dress up and put makeup on for each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
it's so true. Yes, we do. We do.
I don't think my husband even notices if I'm in my pajamas or actually like bothered putting on a nice dress, right? But I think it's ironic, isn't it? Because you're so right that like, we can have all of these credentials. And like, I remember at this point in my career feeling like, yeah, I've got all the things and like, they're all on my website and like realizing none of my clients cared. Like they had no idea what any of them meant. We're killing ourselves to get all these letters after our names. And it's really about signaling to other people in the industry about what your tribe is. You know, the fact that you are, yes, okay, committed to standards and education. But again, the public isn't the one appreciating that message. We're doing it for each other. And this is maybe not a popular thing to say, but I think it's become part of a gatekeeping thing in the industry about who's allowed to present, who's allowed to write, who's allowed to have an opinion, for crying out loud, right? So you have to have credentials for anyone to think that you're even worth listening to. And that's another cool thing about our community is we're trying to remove a lot of the obstacles that are in the industry that have been for like presenting, for instance. At our L.E.G.S conferences, we've now had 2, and they were out of this world. People who've been in the field for decades saying some of the best conferences they've ever been to, like just out of this world. And it's all our students presenting, and most of them have never presented. And so they can apply to present at the conference. It's all populated by them as opposed to big names in the industry. And they get to say, you know, these are the things that I think are important. They put together these presentations. And I cannot tell you how impressed I was. I think there's something about people feeling like, oh my gosh, I have this opportunity and I do have things to say. And you remove these obstacles to me having the chance to say them. That's really freeing for professionals. And it's not about lowering the bar, right? That could be an easy outside judgment. Oh, you're lowering the bar. These presentations were mind-blowingly well-researched, sourced, delivered, organized, just eloquently. And I think that's the type of thing that we're really needing is a reframing of our values and this like stratification that we've had, which probably isn't unique to the dog industry. Like, let's be honest, it's probably a human behavior, tribalism thing, right? Classism thing, whatever, where it's like, I'm better than you, or you're not as good as me, or I'm not as good as you, or whatever that is. And I remember the industry when I first came into it 25 some odd years ago, like going to conferences, and there was this huge divide between the speakers and the attendees. Like the speakers would all go and hang out with each other and talk with each other. And you're like, oh my God, they talked to me. They gave me the time of day. They signed my book. Like, I don't like all the fan stuff, right? We're all just people that love dogs and that are like working towards their best interest, and the humans that are also loving them. And I like the idea of like evening the playing field and looking at it more like, actually, this is one of our new catchphrases of forget the ecosystem, join the ecosystem. Thinking of it like, instead of this top-down model, whether it's with our dogs, our clients, each other, of who's better, who gets the control and the upper hand as the puppeteer or whatever, how can we look at it like an ecosystem, like nature's model, where everyone has a niche and a role to play, and it takes everyone to keep it functioning.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
I think you're so right about that status thing, isn't it? Can you imagine in the UK a conference where someone speaks and they don't have any letters after their name?
Yeah,
There's no APDT or APBC or anything like that. Like, it just is unheard of.
Wait, do you know what? It got me thinking. So I was in, what's the organisation now? Fab Clinicians, is it? Or something? Anyway, I'd requested to be a member. So I'm doing my uni degree. I've been doing dog training for like 10 years. And then I thought, do you know what? I maybe fancy going for the clinical animal behaviourist title and making myself sound a bit old snooty. And then as soon as I started, I was like, why? Why am I doing this? Nobody cares. But I enrolled with, I'm sure it was Fab. And then I was like, paid for my membership, as you do, because, you have to pay for these things. And then after, about like 5 months. And literally all it got me was access to some webinars and a Facebook group. And everybody in there, again, was very, very much, if you're not a practicing clinical animal behaviorist, then blah, blah, blah. And it was very, again, that kind of mix of people. But then they booted me out of it because they said, you're a student, but you're practicing. And I was like, well, yes, because look at all this other stuff I've done. Look at the career that I've had. Look at the reviews. Look at how I train. You haven't even looked into anything about me. You've just gone, you shouldn't be practicing because you've not got your CAB title. And they booted me out.
Wow.
Yeah. And that has been something I've also experienced from the very beginning. I actually remember an email that I wrote to a certain person in the industry when I was all of 21 years old, like asking them a question about something, right? Very well-intentioned, humble, and overly idealistic that I was. And the response I got was, I'm not answering your question, and you shouldn't even be working with dogs because you are not a certified animal behaviorist with, a master's degree or whatever it was. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of weird because I have a degree, right, in applied ethology, and in the US, there wasn't any program for me to get a degree at that time, like in a master's or PhD, and there still isn't, ironically, in applied ethology. And that was the model that I liked, right? I didn't want to go kind of the animal behaviorist route because that ethology was so important to me. And it was just kind of like, well, that's not good enough. So even though you have a degree, it's not the right degree. And that's continued to be like this theme. A lot of the online abuse that I got in the last few years since launching my course was gatekeeping from a few people in academia who said, since you don't have your master's or PhD yet, you're literally not allowed to talk about this. And you cannot call yourself an applied ethologist, even if you are a member of the International Society for Applied Ethology, and they require an educational background and it's good enough for them. It's not good enough for us. You're a fraud. You're a fake. You don't know anything. You shouldn't be educating people. And it's just like, could we be merit-based? Could we be, there's so many people that are able to get the education that they're needing. I'm not saying that everything should just be completely loosey-goosey and like unstructured and definitely, not substantiated. We need to make sure that we're sourcing our information from good places. But there is an ability for people to self-educate these days because of the internet. And so if they know how to do that and they pursue their continuing education with a fervor, and they're able to fill in those blanks and create those kinds of professional experiences in the course of their career, I don't see that there should be, I think it's actually really disruptive that we can't be able to talk about certain things. So the beginning of my course, I actually said, hey, I'm just going to say before I start this, I don't know everything. If you sit here and you listen to this, trying like say, well, she didn't know this. Guess what? I don't. None of us know everything. Could we just get that out of the way at the beginning of this course? And it still is important that we have an interdisciplinary view of dogs instead of just, applied behavior analysis exclusively, which is what we've been kind of taught to believe is the body of information we need as dog behavior or trainer practitioners. And everything else, you can't talk about it despite its relevance for our work, right? So we may go to conferences here or talk on it, but we aren't supposed to talk about it after the fact. So I had spent, a decade doing interdisciplinary research for my book after I had graduated from college and from all of this experience I had working with clients and dogs. And the more that I was learning, the more I felt it imperative that somebody try to package that interdisciplinary model and share it with others. And I do think it's important that we say it is okay for us to talk about it. I'm not going to pretend to be a neurologist. I'm not going to pretend to be a human psychologist. I'm not going to pretend to be a biologist, but it doesn't mean that I can't learn from all of the contributions that each of those fields have to the conversation that we're having about dogs. And I think that is a really important shift that we're making. And I realize it's a little messy, but it doesn't mean it's not a worthwhile endeavor.
I love all of that. And it's so true because ultimately we are all human beings and we all have experiences and we can all teach somebody something from our perspective and from our learnings, and you piece everything together, don't you? And there was a few things I was thinking whilst she was talking then was that this degree that I'm doing, because it's not the right degree, as you say, I don't get instant clinical behaviorist title. I have to apply for it, and I have to fill in a 36-page document if I want to do it, to map over all the modules that I have studied to see if it meets the criteria. And then that only gets you a pre-cert. Then you have to do loads of case studies and all of this stuff. Whereas if I could have done the same degree at a different university, which I couldn't physically get to, and they didn't do distance learning, and I'm not going to uproot my whole young family to go and do a degree, then I would have had instant into that. And I'm like, well, that's just ridiculous. And then the other thought chain I had while she was talking about the knowledge that you've gotten because you didn't have that particular master's. It's like my sister is actually a secondary school teacher. She did her degree in like physical education, like sports stuff. Yeah, she's teaching a secondary school, which she teaches like religious studies. What the hell does she know about religious studies? She's doing, what else was she? She told me that she's teaching a module on psychology. And I'm like, didn't you do a PE degree? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. And this is the generation that we're raising. Yet for some reason, like when we want to get on stage and talk about something, because you haven't got the right thing and it's that like minutiae detail, you're a fraud.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really ridiculous. And it's again, looking at the human behavior part of it, stepping out of the conflict, I can see that it's not about me, right? Like their criticisms aren't about me. It's about probably people feeling threatened because of the gates they're keeping. And I think that that's part of the kind of barrier that we're trying to be able to break through, is to say that, yeah, everybody does have something to contribute to the conversation. And like, so I'm about to be pursuing my master's or PhD as well. Ironically, largely because I just want to be able to say, are you happy now? And it's weird because like, I mean, I want to do it because I have a lot more to learn, but I also know how much I know. So it's like, I know that I don't need to prove it to people. And I also just love learning, right? So it's like selfish on the one hand, because it's like, it gives me the opportunity to really focus on doing a lot more research. And I just love expanding everything that is kind of under my mental hood. I just find it all fascinating. But I also know I'm going for probably a degree in zoology because they still don't have an applied ethology master's or PhD, except for Adam McCloskey is his one group, is the only place where you can get like a legit applied ethology master's or PhD. And it's not distance learning, as you say. So I can't uproot my family and go to Hungary. That's not going to happen. That's not realistic. But I want to be able to get as close as I can, which is going to turn into a zoology degree probably. Because that is the closest in terms of having the body of information I am most interested in. And yet a zoology degree in this field doesn't mean anything to the public, to other professionals. They're going to be like, what? And the funny thing is that we have tons of people in our student community who have masters and PhDs in zoology, in animal behavior, in psychology, in ethology from all over the world. And they're taking the course and learning new things from the course because applied ethology itself is a slightly different angle on ethology because it's specific to captive and domesticated species. And so it just goes to show that whatever it is, and whatever it is, that you have as a degree under your belt, we're all still learning and we all still have something to contribute to that conversation. I can learn from them. That's why I also love the group and our conversations, our Q&As we have. It's a collaborative model that we're learning from each other. It's not like Kim is the wisdom holder and the gatekeeper. And then all these people come and listen to Kim as the, top-down deliverer of information. It's let's have a conversation. Here's the topic for today. Here's the paper we're going to be discussing and how this relates to our work with families. What do you guys think? What do you guys know? How can you contribute? And I think that idea of being open and generous and curious rather than kind of insular and hyper protective of information as this is the correct body and I have the correct body of information and I have the correct degree that goes along with it. And everyone that doesn't have it, right? They shouldn't be practicing. I don't think it's helpful. I think it's actually quite destructive to each other and ultimately to our service of what we're trying to do, helping dogs in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Because ultimately, you learn things new all the time. So by gatekeeping and doing that protective bit and going, this is the way it always has to be, I feel like I'm not doing myself a disservice today because I'm about to go into, I wasn't even let into another organisation, was I? Because my business model was so far fetched from what they wanted it to be. They wanted your very typical archaic 90s class setup. And I was like, I don't do this. I'll do it for the assessment. But I still didn't do it in a way that they liked because I didn't go in and fuss all the dogs and say hello. And I actually gave the dogs their space and I separated all the dogs into their own spaces. And they were like, you wasn't thinking about the dogs. You didn't fuss any single one of those dogs. I was like, they don't know me. It's not my place to go in. Fuss all. And they didn't like it. But they did turn around to me and go, I cannot believe that your business model actually works. It sounds amazing, but I don't understand how it can work because why would anybody want to learn any of the theory stuff? And I was like, well, I'm not sitting there spouting theory, but okay. There's elements of it because I was asking people to think about, so why would you teach your dog a down? And I got them thinking and trying to talk about it and they didn't like it. They were like, should have just gone in and taught the down. I was like, oh, okay then. But yeah, they wouldn't let me into that either. I'm not a very good dog trainer, am I? I've been barred from all these places.
I do think that's the kind of thing we need to be questioning though, right? Is rather than just following a template blindly, I think it's important we question it, especially now. I do think the paradigm has to change. We've had this model for a long time of dog obedience. This is what you do. You get a dog, you teach them these 5 basic behaviors that will then be all you need in life to navigate everything that happens and tell your dog what to do when. And it's not a great model. It's really not a great model. It is so reductionist for the dog's experience and their potential and your potential to have a relationship with them. And so people spend all this time establishing, okay, this is it. This is what it should look like. Only for us to find it's outdated a year later, right? So maybe instead of focusing on the structure, we need to focus on the substance. It's kind of again, the kind of L.E.G.S model of focusing on the antecedent iceberg of what's underneath the surface rather than just the tip of the iceberg and what's observable. I think we've had such a hyper emphasis on observable that we've become obsessed with just that tip of the iceberg whether it's our business model or the dog's behavior or whatever, instead of, yeah, but what's really going on? Like, it's okay to be curious. It's okay to ask questions. And frankly, to not know the answer. That's part of the process of growing.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Kim, I could talk to you all day.
We've said this on an episode with somebody else this week. We need to do a part 2 of this because there's so much more to say.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love it.
Yeah. No. Okay, then. We'll wrap it up there for today because I genuinely would make this a 5-hour podcast otherwise.
We have one more question for you, though.
Yeah.
Who do you know that could help us continue spreading our message of uplifting the industry that we could bring onto the podcast?
Oh, wow. Well, so not knowing exhaustively who you've already had on, it's interesting that this is one of the individuals that's top of mind. And I actually just referenced her a moment ago because we are so surprised and excited in our own community to have this contribution. So even though she doesn't have a big background in dogs, so technically we could all just boo her off stage because she doesn't have all the right doggy letters after her name.
She can join me.
Marlene O'Neill-LaBerge is the person that is in our community with the human mental health background, who has specialization in trauma and working with children and social work capacities and families. And what she's been able to contribute to the conversation in our community and the dog world in general, I know she's just been presenting on Mike Shikashio's platform as well, has been really remarkable because she's bringing in all of this wisdom from a field that's a little bit further down the road in terms of that professional kind of atmosphere, in terms of having important boundaries for our own self-care, in terms of tolerance of other professionals and like appropriate communication and behavior, especially publicly with each other and things like that. And it's really helping us to appreciate as family dog mediators, the depth of the human side of this that we haven't as an industry focused on historically, when it's of course 50% or more, because the humans are the ones with all the control of what's actually happening with the dogs. So I think she would be a remarkable and surprising addition because she's kind of moving more into the dog world while still being very active in the human mental health world as well.
Oh, we'll definitely
Love
have
it.
her on. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Fabulous. And if people want to find out more about you, Kim, or certainly if you've not done it already, go and do that L.E.G.S course, where can they find out more about you?
Yeah, so our website is familydogmediation.com, and people can go there and find not only the primary L.E.G.S course for professionals that, again, we'd recommend as a plug-in regardless of what capacity you work with dogs in, but there's a bunch of other deep dives. Actually, you can go and watch all those talks that I was referencing from our last 2 years' conferences. They're all a la carte presentations that are available on the website. So you can see what we were talking about in terms of all the incredible wisdom that we have in our community. I don't know when this is going to be airing, but we do have a 50% off summer sale that's starting this week and going through to July 4th. So if it happens to air before then people would be able to take advantage of that as well. And if not, they can wait for the Black Friday month-long sale that we have in the fall.
Amazing. Oh, well, thank you ever so much for your time today, Kim. I've loved it and absolutely cannot wait to get you on again.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you again for inviting me.
You're very welcome. We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. So don't forget to like, share and follow. And we'd love it if you'd give us a quick review.